Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to return my attention away from the Northern Ireland situation just briefly, I don't think for long, and towards the customs border that the government like to pretend is just fine and dandy. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So yeah, I think there's a bit of more Brexit trade news to be discussing this week, but we had at the end of last week some more trade data. We're up to April now. So we'll discuss that. I will keep discussing that while it seems relevant. Thing to remember is we have two types of Brexit customs border and therefore two types of Brexit trade we need to consider, neither of which existed before this nonsense. We've got one customs border inside the UK between Britain and Northern Ireland, which Boris Johnson continues to deny that he had any idea about, even though there are recordings of him discussing the very consequences he now claims to know nothing about. But there are also borders where the UK is on one side and the EU directly on the other. No messing about there, no protocol, no grace periods. Less politically sensitive, which is why they are getting less attention in general right now, because at the end of the day, businesses are failing because of this, whereas when it comes to the customs border inside the UK, businesses are failing because of that. And it's politically highly inflammable. But economically, the customs border between the UK and the EU is actually more damaging. Because when it comes to exports of goods from Britain to Northern Ireland, even if our government was honouring its word to the letter, the implementation is still less severe than from Britain to other EU countries like, say, France, Belgium, Netherlands, and so on. Goods passing across these customs borders are subject to full third country checks and restrictions, including having your cheese sandwiches taken off you, and is the reason why many export businesses are struggling and many picnic basket hunters are also struggling. And then some businesses, of course, going under. So what are the main figures from April, over a quarter of a year into Brexit, and at a time when the government said everything is now fine? Actually, they've been saying that for a while, haven't they? See, in January, said, there's no problems. It's all fine, look. Then when the data came out showing the severe problems, they switched to, yeah, there were a few teething problems, yeah. But it was sorted out for February. February is fine. Then the data came out for February and it was, yeah, there were a few problems still being worked out. But it was sort of sorted by the end of February. March was fine. I'll let you guess how it went for March. And now we've got April's figures. We're now into that trickier territory that I discussed before, where a direct comparison with the same period last year is utterly invalid because that was when Europe was largely shut down with the first COVID wave. Even the ONS, the Office for National Statistics, who works on these trade figures, they've put in bold in their report, it's not a valid comparison, just stupid to do that comparison. And they have suggested we compare with 2018. Which they describe as the last stable year when neither Brexit nor COVID were buggering about with things. Of course, you could also argue this makes it impossible to compare our current trading data at all, because there's a straight up comparison in export numbers. Absolutely. Comparing with 2018 has a few issues. We're not stable now. So even if we wanted to be really fair, comparing it to 2018, because that was stable when we're not now, not really. Also, inflation means that real terms trade can be down, but trade figures can look up when you compare to 3 years ago. And this indeed has created an issue with that comparison. But, the Office for National Statistics have sort of worked around that. But, less objective people can fiddle the stats on this. Really, the main comparisons are going to need to be made in a year or two when there is no pandemic excuse. When we're in a year where the pandemic has no impact and the previous year the pandemic had no impact, so you've got that year-on-year comparison. We are at least 2 years away from that. We also need, of course, a chance to consolidate our post-Brexit systems. Because again, Brexit supporters may reasonably conclude that there could well be severe trade problems now because of the sudden shock to the system. Not all of them are that blinker. They'll go, well, we didn't have an implementation period. We probably should. I still think it's better to have left the EU. I still think it's better to have left the single market. But we did it really suddenly. But that's going to improve with time as we adjust. In the same way that Northern Irish businesses will inevitably adjust over time by shifting supply lines southwards rather than eastwards. adjustments will happen, of course. The key question is, will the net effect be a larger economy, a smaller economy, or will it stay the same? Same sized economy, but more of that sovereignty that somehow means we get less freedom to do things that we used to take for granted. That's sovereignty. At the end of the day, we clearly have Brexit impacting our exports. How could we not? We now have more paperwork. That costs money. A lot more paperwork, in fact. Companies exporting small shipments also have transport problems. There's more transport problems to discuss as well. Lumping them together with other smaller shipments on lorries, so-called cabotage, which was the solution before, is not so straightforward now, because a single small shipment whose paperwork is not up to snuff could lead to a delay of weeks for the hundreds of other shipments. Logistics companies are not keen on doing this, and certainly the 499 people who've sent a small shipment where their paperwork was fine is not happy for it to be delayed for weeks for the one person out of 500 that didn't. We also have the issue that some goods can't be exported at all, or there are limits on the quantities that can be exported. None of this happened before. But those trying to bang the Brexit drum want to talk about our post-Brexit trade. So let's see. Here we go. Headline statements from the ONS report. 1. Total exports of goods fell in April 2021, driven in terms of falls in exports to non-EU countries. So we may indeed be stabilising our suppressed level of trade with the EU, compared to the previous month. I mean, that's not a good thing. It went down, it stayed down. But the thing is, we're not making up for it with trade with the rest of the world. In fact, that suffered further decline in April. Second one, UK car production was up from 2020, when obviously manufacturing was largely shut down, but 42.9% down compared with the 5-year average. 43% down on the 5-year average. Don't give me that crap about Nissan. 43% lower levels of production compared to 2018. If I could offer some small advice, purely objectively, for Brexit supporters trying to form arguments, because we must be fair, take a leaf out of Nigel Farage's book. Do not, at any time from here on in, if you are trying to argue about the benefits for Brexit, never, ever, ever be drawn on talking about fishing, farming, or the car industry. You are onto a massive loser with them. And if you actually open by discussing any of these things without being prompted, you really don't know what you're doing. Third thing, exports down compared to the same period in 2018, but imports increased. That suggests we're more reliant on imports, but we're not actually selling as much. The quarter leading up to April also saw both exports and imports go down compared to 2018. But like I say, we might have expected some COVID impact, even if we didn't have Brexit on top of it. But nonetheless, it's a story of exports being down, which is how we sell. I mentioned a couple of days ago, there was a pro-Brexit paper trying to claim that the figures showed Brexit growth based on this report. I suggested at the time before I read it, it was probably I just had a scan at that point, just based on a comparison with the time when Europe was closed for business. And sure enough, that's what they've tried to do. But the actual report makes clear that our post-Brexit trade is down compared to pre-Brexit. It will be increasingly open to deliberate misrepresentation now to make comparisons that now that the pandemic's over a year old, you can compare to when pandemic was worse. I'll keep throwing out my own comments on it, of course, but there are two overriding things to bear in mind. One, there will never be a point where our trade actually grows based on a pre-Brexit equivalent period. How could it? How can you improve trade with more trade barriers? And not just with the EU. The non-EU trade deals that we are arranging are also effectively creating trade barriers, because they're not as good as the ones we had inside the EU. This is why the government's own assessment talks about maybe a 0.1% boost to our economy, and even that is based on no deal at all, not what we had in the EU. And also 0.1% with intolerance, that could actually be a negative boost. And given that they're almost certain to be massaging the stats to give the most optimistic outlook, I mean, that's what I would do. It very likely is a negative boost when the real figures come out. It's also why, when challenged in Parliament, no minister has been able to point to a single line in any trade agreement that is better than what we had in the EU. They've been challenged to do that. They have not been able to do that. And I don't just mean they've said something that's not true. They've actually just known not to say anything. The second thing to bear in mind is that yes, the EU has a lot of rules that its members would really rather not apply to them. No one likes to accept rules. Some people will see the benefit in rules and go, but they still don't want it to be a rule because it's like, well, I will just naturally do that anyway. But the rules, of course, exist for mutual benefit. But politicians, or at least the good ones, work for national benefit and will try and pinch advantages where they can. Of course they do. So why do all these countries accept those rules? Why did ours, before we had a government that wanted to sink the country rather than sink their party? Because the trade benefits are enormous, which means the reverse is also true. The economic cost of leaving the club is enormous. This is not a matter of speculation. It's not a matter of politics even. It's a matter of simple mathematics. If there were a route to a stronger economy on the doorstep of the EU, but outside of it, do you think it would only be this government of bubbleheads and racists that would have foreseen it? Priti Patel and Dominic Raab going down in history as great visionaries? Behave yourself. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.